MZTV.
God orchestrated every millimeter of the attempted Trump assassination because President Trump had not turned his head that last moment as he's gesturing to the chart, to the board, to the big screen with immigration statistics on it. Instead of the bullet grazing his right ear, it would have gone into his right ear, and we would have had a Zapruder film situation. Speaking of the JFK assassination, I've been a student of assassinations. I don't know why. They're terrible, I guess, but they're fascinating in their horror. I've studied the Lincoln assassination. I've gone to Washington, D.C. My son Gabe and I followed John Wilkes Booth's escape route out of D.C. over the Navy Yard Bridge into Virginia and his eventual capture at Garrett's farm. And of course, I've been to Dallas. I've been to the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository building, and I stood on the spot where Abraham Zapruder stood when he shot that awful footage where you can see the president's head explode and his brain matter spraying out. It's just tear evoking. And we would have had a situation like that yesterday with so many cameras on the scene. And I mean, when I watched the footage of that, I cried every time I saw it. And of course, Trump's defiance, his not showing, this is really remarkable. He did not show one inkling of fear. The man came within millimeters of being killed. And for the life of me, I cannot understand. Well, I can. It's a God thing. I'm going to get into that, of course. This is Martin Zender. Welcome to MZTV. I'm delaying my regularly scheduled programming here to bring you this special news report, end time report. I was going to talk about the armor of God. We'll do that tomorrow. But I cannot understand for the life of me why after the shots were fired out, Trump grabs his ear, goes down, and the Secret Service surround him. They let him get back up. I mean, now with hindsight, I'm glad they did. Otherwise, we would not have that iconic live forever moment with Trump, blood streaming down his face, putting up his fists and saying, fight, fight, fight. It's just, if this man wasn't Antichrist material before this, I mean, I don't see what more can happen. My opinion, and that's all it is. I don't know who the man of lawlessness is, but my opinion that it's Donald Trump is even further confirmed in my own head. And may God keep my head on my shoulders where it is, and Trump's as well. Trump is the most protected man in the world. The only other person I've said that of, and recently when I did the Roman series, I talked about Phoebe, who Paul handed the scroll, the original scroll, the only existence of the book of Romans, handed it to Phoebe, one of the saints who was living in Corinth where Paul wrote Romans, and she took that to Rome. Put it in her cloak, in her bosom, one would expect, and she was the most protected person because nothing was going to happen to that woman as long as she was in possession of that scroll, and God wanted her to get to Rome. But in fact, this could be said of anyone at any time, that people are absolutely and totally protected by God until God decides that their time is up. Nothing will happen to Trump until, this is all assuming that he is the white horse rider. And again, I have to say, again, I don't know that for sure. Nobody does. But nothing's going to happen to him. He is going to rise to a power that no one's ever had. And yet, apart from the fears of the left, he is not going to be a dictator. He is not going to be a tyrant. It's just the opposite, because the false white horse rider, again, is riding a white horse. He is going to, as he has promised to do, he is going to end corruption on a scale that we have not seen, that no one has ever seen. Because we've never seen corruption at this stage. We've never seen corruption so in full bloom, in full sight, with so many people, so many trusted government agencies are corrupt, that the whole rotting mess needs dismantled. Speaking of my country specifically now, but other countries could say this. And as I'm speaking, I'm recording this Sunday evening, so there may be more information coming by the time I broadcast this, by the time this is published at 8 a.m. in the morning. But other countries, there is a call for freedom. There is a call for freedom of the press, freedom of religion, freedom of expression. People do not want tyrants ruling over them. And the reason this is remarkable is that there has been a counter move to enslave the population by oppressive government. People ask me about my politics. I said, my politics are very simple. I just want small government that leaves people alone. That's it. Boom. You can't put me in a category. I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a conservative. I'm not a liberal. I'm a small government guy, but I'm not libertarian either. I know we need some government. But this man, Donald Trump, I mean, I'm glad he did that, but they should have covered him completely. When you looked at it, they were putting their hands up over his head as they were leading him to the car, the legendary Beast. Isn't that ironic? His car is called the Beast. I don't know. What do you think about that? What do you think about that? You know, I've spoken before about close calls. Why does God purposely do close calls? Because he could very well not do close calls. Like when the car just misses you, or you see a car just miss your young child on his bicycle. You go through this horrifying thing. It's like, oh my God, that was an inch from death. And you ask God, in a way you're relieved, of course, totally relieved, but in a way it haunts you for the rest of your life, because you think, why did that have to happen? And then those of us who understand the sovereignty of God, we ask God, why did that have to happen? Because of this. Because God purposely gives you close calls just to give you a wake-up call to let you know that he is there. He is on the job. He is orchestrating every detail of your life. He's always doing this. It never stops. But you come to take it for granted after a while. Or you ignore it. I guess that's the same thing. Or you maybe are tempted to think, maybe God isn't, nothing's really happening. Maybe God isn't in control. Maybe I do have a little bit of free will, or some similar silly thought as that. And then something dramatic happens, and you feel the hand of God. I mean, Trump said he heard the bullet whizzing past. It hit him. It hit him if he had not turned. I'm telling you, people talk about God not being in control of the details. This is absurd. I did a video on the sovereignty of God, about God being behind every little detail, down to the millimeters of things. And here is an example of it. I mean, there are millions of examples of it every day. God being sovereign depends on him being in control of every little tiny detail. You cannot have like these people, these limited free will people. They're not thinking it through. They're illogical. They're emotional. And they're selfish. They want a little bit of freedom. And so they want to have it both ways. They want to say, yes, God's in control, but he leaves the little details up to me. He can make corrections as he goes along, but he's not controlling every little thing you do. Oh, yes, he is. In him we live and move and are. And Paul used that word in Acts 17:25 and Acts 17:28. He used it in front of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers on Mars Hill in Athens. In him we, and he gestured to the crowd. He was not only speaking of himself, but to the philosophers, to the heathen, to everybody in the world. God gives to all life and breath and all. I believe that's Acts 17:25. God gives to all life and breath and all. In Acts 17:28, the result of that is in him we live and move and are. And Donald Trump moved an inch. And because of that, the bullet was heading to enter his skull. And he turned and it grazed his ear. Do you realize what would have happened? What kind of... Well, some people are saying there would be a, I don't want to even say the phrase because of censorship, but, one of those conflicts that occur within a country, it's not an international conflict, it's the country fighting against itself. Yes, some people would say that would have happened. But the enemies of Trump, I haven't talked to you since the convictions. The enemies of Trump are turning him into a living legend and now a living martyr. You don't see a living martyr too often. Usually you have to get killed to be a martyr. Not this man. Not this man. He's a living martyr now, and he is going to assume God-like status, because now, and I've seen, somebody sent me a piece of art someone did with an angel of the Lord over Trump, like the protection of God, and I didn't laugh at it because that's about how it is. That's about how it is. Of course, God again is over everyone, but when you're looking at a man who is as famous as Trump, the most famous man in the world, and soon to be again the most powerful man in the world, and when you look at the same time at what God is doing to Trump's opponent, the illustrious, the great, and the powerful, Joseph Biden, you see how things are working both ways. God is decimating Trump's enemies, and he's raising him to this God-like immortal status. Of course, we know that no one's immortal, but I'm not thinking any less. I'm not dialing back any of my talking to people. When people ask me about the Antichrist, I'm not dialing back that it's Trump. It's being ratcheted up for me. And this, to me, seals the deal. Now, I don't want anyone to think that this is a fulfillment of the prophecy of Revelation 13. I'm going to read that now about the wound. I believe that I'm just going to speak for the rest of the show on the assumption that Trump is the man of lawlessness. I don't know that, okay? Again, but this was a microcosm of that. This was, if you will, a dress rehearsal of that. But this was not that. For those of you who are not aware, there's a prophecy in the book of Revelation concerning the man of lawlessness, or the Antichrist. And for those, who never heard of the Antichrist, there is a personage that is prophesied to appear in the last days to be a savior, but it's not the real savior. It's a false savior. But what's interesting about the phrase Antichrist is unlike the English language, it doesn't mean against Christ. It means instead of Christ. So the Antichrist, instead of being this shady, obviously evil person that Christianity would like to paint him as, it's this slick manipulator. I mean, Trump's slick. I don't mean to say he's not slick, but the Antichrist is going to be someone who even we would see as a savior, even not as our savior from sin and death, but as a savior from the woes of the earth, from the afflictions that we are all suffering under, whether it's high taxes, the unaffordability of many, many things. Many people can't afford their rent, and they're having to make decisions. Do I send my kid to school, or do I eat? It's just getting really bad. And this is what happens when you have tyrannical regimes that are after power. They purport to care about the people, but they don't. They just want power. I believe, you may call me silly or naive if you want, but I actually believe that Donald Trump loves the country, because this is the only guy who in 2016 for the most part, financed his own campaign. The guy was a multi-billionaire, did not need the money, was as famous as could be, had wonderful life, wonderful family. His kids love him. His kids love him. That tells you a lot about the guy. His kids and his grandkids love him. That tells you a lot. I don't want anybody to tell me Trump's part of the deep state. He's one of the bad guys. He's a double agent or a triple agent. That is absolutely ridiculous. As I've said many times before, speaking relatively now, Trump, his election in 2016 was an anomaly. Like, that was not supposed to happen. And the reason he won in 2016 is because the opposition didn't think they had to cheat. They weren't ready for it. They hadn't geared up any cheating protocol because the polls all said that the Wicked Witch of the West was going to win, no problem, 90% chance that she was going to win. So the cheating machine did not go into effect. But in 4 years after that, it was a different story, wasn't it? Yes, it was. And it is certainly now a different story because Trump's enemies are so desperate for him not to get in power because him getting into power is their undoing and they know it. And so they will stop at nothing. Nothing. I mean, I am not a conspiracy theorist guy. I know. I believe this was a 20-year-old kid. I know there's a bunch of theories going around now. The sharpshooters on an adjacent building, they apparently look like they saw the shooter before he fired. Why didn't they do something? I'm not going to get into all of that. I mean, I wouldn't put anything past those who hate Donald Trump. And if there's anyone out there who hates Donald Trump, you have a disease. It's called Trump derangement syndrome. There's a name for it. I don't think it can be cured. It's called TDS for short, and there's no hope for you. You just have to go on hating and hating and hating. I mean, there have been many presidents who got elected that I didn't like. I didn't like it when Clinton won. I didn't like it when Obama won. I definitely didn't like what happened in 2020, but what do? You take a deep breath, you know God's in control, and you just go on. And Paul tells us to pray for the leaders, pray for those in power. And we're supposed to be subject to those in superior authority also, and not many people like that. I know many of you don't like that. I don't like it, but that's what Paul says, sorry. And Paul doesn't say be subject until the authority goes bad. When the authority goes bad, set watchdogs over the authority. The saying goes that Paul is supposedly saying, and you can be subject to the authorities when they're good. But if the authorities turn evil, then you are no longer required to be subject to them. Then you can fight them and you can engage in acts of civil disobedience if necessary. That is totally wrong because if you look at how Paul launches into Romans 13:1, Romans 13:1 doesn't start in Romans 13:1. You heard it from your friend Martin Zender, the world's most outspoken Bible scholar. It starts in Romans 12 when Paul says, conquer evil with good. In fact, that's the last line of chapter 12. Conquer evil with good. Be subject to the superior authorities. You see, I just skipped right over the chapter heading at 13:1. I just ran 12 right into chapter 13. In fact, I will do it for you right now live here just to show you that I know what I'm talking about as usual. Romans 12, be not conquered by evil, but conquer evil with good. That's 21. Be not conquered by evil, but conquer evil with good. Let every soul be subject to the superior authorities. That is a way to conquer evil with good. Be subject to the superior authorities. You get rid of the chapter headings. There were no chapters when Paul wrote this. So 21 goes right into verse 1 of 13. That the way to conquer evil with good is to be subject to the superior authorities. And in this context, the superior authorities have to be evil. So it's the opposite of what people think. They have to be evil for this to make any sense. You don't need to be told to be subject to a good authority. Anyway, I got off my topic there. I'm sorry, but I think that was worthwhile. So I get kind of down when somebody wins that I don't like it, but we're supposed to be subject to the superior authorities. But these people, they think there's no democracy unless their man is in office. So they're telling all sorts of lies. And to those with TDS who believe every single lie that's been told about Trump, he's a racist, he's a homophobe, he hates women, he hates Mexicans, he hates all Latin people. He hates Martians, even though none of them have ever come to our planet. Trump hates everybody. I'm sorry, you've just believed these terrible, terrible lies. But there's There's no cures. So just, I don't know, take a deep breath and relax. Know that God is in control. Okay? Can you do that? Just realize God is in control. If Trump doesn't win, I'll realize God's in control and I'll be at peace and I'll be subject to the superior authorities. But we are in a time now, at the close of this eon, where the 6,000 years is about to expire and things are happening at an incredibly rapid rate, not just with technology, but politically, the way the globe is shaping up. And we've been looking for a white horse rider. And if this man isn't it, you give me an alternative. Give me an alternative now. After this happened, give me an alternative. Revelation chapter 13 to end the show here. And it was standing on the sand of the sea. Let's go to, since there's no chapter headings in Revelation either, let's go to verse 17 of chapter 12. And the dragon is angry with the woman and came away to do battle with the rest of her seed who are keeping the precepts of God and who have the testimony of Jesus. Chapter 13, verse 1, I'm in the unveiling of Jesus Christ, popularly known as the book of Revelation. And it was standing on the sand of the sea, and I perceived a wild beast ascending out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads, and on its horns 10 diadems, and on its heads blasphemous names. The horns are governmental bodies. And the wild beast which I perceived was like a leopardess, and its feet were as a bear's, and its mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gives it its power and its throne and great authority. If you read Daniel chapter 7, you will discover that the beast being described here is an amalgamation of the 4 beasts that Daniel saw coming out of the sea. The leopardess, the she-bear, the lioness, and then the 4th beast, which was more terrible than the others, called the monstrous. All these beasts come together now to form a one-world government and a one-world religion. But you have to remember, the leader of this monstrosity is a white horse rider. So while John is seeing this monstrous beast, this appears on the earth as a beautiful thing. Remember, Satan disguises himself as a messenger of light, an angel of light, and his minions as dispensers of righteousness. So John's seeing it as the truly what it is, but as it appears on the earth, is going to be righteous. It's going to look righteous. It's going to do things that we would want it to do, as I have said. Verse 3, and I perceived one of its heads as if it had been slain to death. This is not the head of the man of lawlessness. This is one of the heads of this beast. 7 heads. There are 7 leaders. The 7 heads, I believe, represent 7 leaders that are in charge of various political entities. I perceived one of its heads as if it had been slain to death, and its death blow was cured. It's interesting here, it says as if it had been slain to death, and its death blow was cured. Then the second phrase seems to assume that it really was a death blow, and it was cured, and the whole earth marvels after the wild beast. I mean, you may be tempted to think that this is that, but it's not, because I think it's going to be more dramatic than even what we saw on Saturday night, in that Donald Trump will be dead. And then what happens then, of course, is this entity called the wild beast, an actual spiritual entity, will assume the body of Donald Trump. And that is when the game is on, as far as the last 3.5 years of the 7-year period beginning. And they worship the dragon, seeing that it gives authority to the wild beast. Satan's giving the authority. As good as all these things are going to look on earth, the authority is coming from Satan. But I remind you, 2 Corinthians, Paul says, Satan is now disguising himself as an angel of light. That's very important to know. So, I mean, I think Donald Trump seems to me like a really decent guy. I mean, yeah, he has his problems. He's a ladies' man. We all know that, okay? But nobody cares. Nobody cares. I suppose Melania cares. Yeah, that's true. But I think he's reined in his, as Johnny would say, his lasciviousness. So here we go, folks. What we saw Saturday is a microcosm of what is going to happen in a bigger way once this man again takes the leadership of the free world, destroys corruption on a scale that no one's ever seen before. Because again, no one's seen corruption on a scale this big before. Corruption's always been in human government, obviously, but we're talking on a world scale. And we're talking about the people behind it are very, very close to taking over the entire world. And they will take over the entire world if were it not for this interference. But this interference, the man of lawlessness, is going to take over the world that was built by the obviously evil people. I've said this for 20 years. The obviously evil people, which in my mind are the liberals, the obviously evil, they're going to build this one world monstrosity. But then the good guys, i.e. the conservative party, they're going to take it over. And it's going to be like, okay, everything's fine now because the adults are now in charge, the good people are in charge, and they're going to bring prosperity and good and financial freedom and personal freedom. They're going to bring that, and the world's going to breathe a sigh of relief, and it's going to be wonderful, and you and I are going to think that it's wonderful. And when that happens, ladies and gentlemen, lift your heads up, for your redemption draws nigh, because that is indeed the beginning of the end of this wicked eon.